So this is about the Vue 3 Composition API, which is pretty new. And I have up here on the screen actually the app we're going to be building. It shows you the current weather at your current location, as well as a 7-day forecast for your current location as well. This uses Vue 3, and it also uses Ionic. If you're not familiar with Ionic, it is a UI framework similar to Bootstrap or the other major UI frameworks you've seen, but it has the added bonus of being able to be deployed both as an Android app and an iOS app, which is pretty cool. And it is just a nice UI as well. It is also, at the time of this video, really the only UI framework that supports Vue 3 fully. So it's an obvious choice for this demo. For the mobile app side, if you wanted to deploy this to a mobile app, it's built on top of Capacitor, which has all these plugins. It's a lot like Cordova, but simplified a bit. We're only going to be using one. That is the geolocation plugin to get the current location, to get the weather for that location. Now, of course, the browser has this built in as well, but the plugins make it a little easier to use, and it'll also help you when you're actually if you deployed it as a mobile app, and tells you how to set up sort of the permissions and stuff. So we'll be using this from Capacitor and this from Ionic. And then the other thing that we're going to be using to actually get the weather is the Open Weather API. I will talk about that a little bit more in a second. What I want to do is actually start my project. You do need the Ionic CLI installed on your machine. As long as you have that, you can simply go here and do Ionic start. I'm going to call this Weather Demo as the name of my project. I'm going to choose Vue for my framework. Ionic supports Angular, React, and Vue. I'm going to do Vue. And now here you can choose your template. Now, when you saw my app, you saw it was a tabs app. And that is what we're going to end up using. But to kind of show off the flexibility and reusability of our Vue 3 code and our architecture, I'm actually going to start with a blank app. And then I'm going to copy our code over into a tabs app just to kind of show how portable and easily reusable it is. If you don't want to do that part, you just want to build tabs right from the start, that's also totally fine. You can still follow along and not follow that step. I'm going to start with a blank project. That's going to set my whole project up. While that happens, I'm going to come back to the Weather API. This is Open Weather. It is free to use. I mean, there are paid tiers as well. But for our purposes, the free tier offers plenty. We're going to really only call one API endpoint, and that is the one call API. So with a single API call, you get the minute forecast, hourly forecast, daily forecast, historical data for 5 days, weather alerts, and then you also get the current weather. This is the one we're going to use. And also, you will need to sign up for this. I have my account here. And once you sign up and verify your email, you can get an API key. I have one here that I created just for demo purposes, which I'm then going to delete before I upload this video. But my API key here is here. This is the API key we need in order to call the API. And if we go to this one call API, the one we care about, we can go to the API doc, and we can get all of our information about how to call it, how the data comes back. So how to make an API call. Here's the URL. We have to pass it a latitude, a longitude, which we're going to get from our GPS data. You can exclude certain parts. We're actually going to exclude the minutely and hourly because we're not really going to use that. We could exclude the alerts as well. For our app, we're just going to be using current and daily. And then you give it your API key. So that is how we will make the call. And we can also, I guess this is a good point, we can also send a unit of measurement. I'm going to be using imperial since I'm in America and we use weird numbers. But you can set the unit that you want to use there as well. So here's an example. And then here's an example response that shows all the data that's going to come back from this API call. And then here's a description of what all of these things are. We're actually going to build out some of this in TypeScript as interfaces, just so we have that laid out. But this is the data that we're going to use to power our app. So the other thing I guess I should mention is that I have Vue VS Code snippets installed to help with templating, so we can build our components really quickly. You don't need this, but it does make things go faster. So we come back over here, our app should be ready. Let's go ahead and do cd in there, just follow the instructions on here, Ionic serve. That'll start the server up, and then let's also go open that folder. This is weather demo. Okay, source folder. There's a couple things that I like to do when I'm starting up an Ionic app. One of them is an ESLint preference. And that is that by default, ESLint does not allow function hoisting, at least in this configuration. And this may be a controversial opinion, but in modern times when we have focused modules and focused components, I like taking advantage of function hoisting. You know, back when there was one gigantic 2,000 line file that was all jQuery, I understand not wanting it. But in modern times, I like function hoisting. It lets me declare some functions down below and then use them up above. Just like you could if you were declaring a class and you had methods on that class that you wanted to use out of order, you're allowed to do that. You don't have to do this, but I like it this way. All you have to do is put your functions in a different order than mine. But I am adding this exception that says you are allowed to use function hoisting, basically use a function before it's defined. The other thing I like to do is create a common Ionics component file, because I've found you use a lot of different Ionic components while you're coding, and I don't like to manually import them every time. So I have been doing a shared folder, and in that shared folder, I just create a common Ionic components, and I'm just going to grab this code out of where I've already been using it. And paste it in here. All this does is imports a number of components that come with Ionic, things like a responsive grid and a card and headers and titles and Ionic pages. You're going to use this a lot throughout Ionic, and all it does is imports them and re-exports them, but then I can use this just as one thing when I do my imports. So these are just two little things that I do when I start up a new project. Neither of these are required. You can put your functions in a different order, and you can just import all of these Ionic components individually. But I do these two things when I start up. Now let's check, did our server start up? I don't think it did because I opened a window. Okay. There it goes. Cool. We have our blank project. So this is out of the box with Ionic. We just created it. We haven't really done anything yet. We changed our ESLint rules and added shared components, but that doesn't really do anything. This is our blank initial project from Ionic. So step number one is we are going to create a new folder for our weather feature. We're doing a folder by feature approach. We will not be doing a views that has a million different views in it that do totally different things. Instead, we're going by feature. So shared is also a feature. It's something that's shared throughout the whole app. For us, we are going to create a weather feature. Cool. We have our weather feature, and then really the next thing that we need to do is we're going to lay out our data structure. So we know our data structure from looking at this one call API. Here's an example of it, and then here is our description. So what I'm going to do is inside my weather feature, I'm going to create a new file. And I'm going to call this onWeather because this is the one API call. I'm going to call that onWeather.model.ts. This is going to be our model that defines what our weather response looks like. And I'm just really going to go off the documentation in the API and build out the data structure. So the base weather has an ID, a main title of like clouds or whatever, a description, which would be like partly cloudy, and then the icon to use. We also have feels like multiple temperatures throughout the day and what that temperature actually feels like when you factor in wind, sunshine, whatever. Day, eve, morn. Nope, that is not what I wanted, VS Code. Do not do that. And night. Cool, so those are the temperatures throughout the day as for what it feels like. There is also, similarly, the regular temperature. So instead of feels like, there's just temperature. And it has day, evening, morning, and night. But it also has a max and a min. So I just made that extend feels like, so I automatically get day, eve, morn, night. But I also get max and min. That covers that. Then we have current weather, which contains a singular temperature for feels like. So the feels like interface up here is actually going to be used in the forecast because that tells us throughout the day what it's going to feel like. But the current weather, there's only one temperature that it feels like right now. So in the current weather, feels like it's just a number. Okay. So current weather feels like humidity. Sunrise and sunsets are like Unix timestamps for the date and time of when the sunrise and sunset happens. Temperature, weather is an array. I believe that's because this API supports sending in multiple cities or like an area where there might be multiple weather. There might be different weather in different places within that area. For us, we're really only going to ever use one, but it is an array in the data structure, so we're defining it as that, and then wind speed is a number. There are, by the way, more properties than this, but these are the only ones we're going to use, so these are the only ones I'm really defining. Okay. Daily weather is very similar, but feels like is going to actually use our interface, because again, this is the daily weather is the forecast. So it's not a current time, it's a whole day. So we use the interface that covers day, evening, morning, and night. Temperature. Okay. Finally, the one that we're actually going to export, because it's the one we're actually going to use. I'm going to call this onWeather because it is the one, again, it's the one API call. All right, so really all that came down to building out this last piece, which is an interface that contains the current weather and then an array of 7 days for our daily weather objects. But we now have our models all defined. You know, if I was really building this out, I would probably put these all in separate files because I'm going to guess some of these are going to be used in different API calls and such. But for now, for our purposes for the demo, I just put them all in here. And this was that wrong import that happened when VS Code decided I didn't want to put the word number. Save that, and we have our model defined. Weather interface is done. Cool. So the next thing now, we have our model defined. Let's actually go fetch the data from the API. So again, we're staying in our weather feature, new file, weather.service.ts. So this is our sort of our data service. You could also call this maybe the weather repository. I'm not really sure naming what you want to go with. I'm still kind of trying to figure that out, but I'm going to go old school Angular naming and just call this a weather service. So in here, we need to define first our URL. This is the URL that we are going to use to make this call. I already have this. This is really just taken directly back from that example. This is that exact URL, the one call. Then, like I mentioned before, we are going to exclude minutely and hourly. And in fact, why don't we go ahead and insert in here our API key. Go back to my page over here, grab my API key. No, we don't need that. I don't know why I did that. It's not a special string. In my example code, I kept the key in a different file, so I did it this way, but we don't really need to do that. We can make that a regular string. There's our weather URL. Secondly, we need a variable to store our actual weather that we get back. Let's, for now, we're going to come back to this and change this. For now, I'm just going to start it out as an empty object. We will revisit that when we talk more about the Composition API, which will be shortly. But I want to make the fetch call and demonstrate a few things first. Okay. Not going to type that yet. Okay. So we're going to now write our function to fetch the current weather at our current location. In order to do that, first, we need to get our current location. So the capacitor plugin that we saw before can be used to grab that. So just based on this example here, we're going to get our current position. That will return coordinates, and in turn, those coordinates return a latitude and longitude. Returns geolocation position. There it is. Timestamp and chords come back. So I'm going to just use a little bit of destructuring to keep our code a little cleaner and just go ahead and grab chords out of the object that this will return. We are making this an async function, so we can use async await. It is an async call to go grab the current location. Plugins. That should have auto-imported that for us. Great. Geolocation.get current position. Cool, that'll return an object that has a timestamp and chords. We're just destructuring that object. We don't care about the timestamp. We're just going to grab chords out of here, which has a latitude and longitude, as well as a number of other properties here. We really only care about latitude and longitude for our purposes. Once we have that, we are going to actually go and grab the weather data. So const response equals fetch weather URL. So we're going to start with our base weather URL. But then we, of course, need to pass it additional properties, namely our latitude and longitude. So we'll do at lat equals chords dot latitude, and lon equals chords dot longitude. And then finally, this part's going to depend if you're in the US or not, but I'm doing units imperial for Fahrenheit. Cool. And then we're going to assign weather equals await response.json. Oops, that was my fault. I forgot to put my await on my fetch. Now all of this, these two lines, 9 and 10, are just regular JavaScript. This is complaining about me because this is a const. Don't worry about that because, again, like I said, we're going to come back to that very shortly, and we will fix that issue. But I just wanted to point out that right now I'm really just writing regular JavaScript. There's nothing Vue happening here. There's no magic. This is a TypeScript file, and fetch is built in a JavaScript. Getting the JSON from your fetch is built in a JavaScript. Like, this is just regular stuff. Nothing out of the ordinary here. But what we're about to do is introduce some Vue magic. The only thing I want to do first is I want to be able to export this stuff out of here so that external files like our Vue components can use it. So let's just write that first. We need to export that. Use weather. Return weather. We want things outside of this to both be able to use our weather object and also fetch it. Boom. Cool. So now we have this. This is being exported. This is being used down here. And we can then use these things in our Vue components. But here's where some of the Vue magic comes in. You see, if we export this out and use it in a Vue component, this weather property, it will actually work. But what's the initial value of it? It's just an empty object that, it doesn't contain any weather data. Only after you call fetch will it contain our weather data. But our fetch happens asynchronously. It takes time to go grab it and get it back. And if we do that, yeah, the data will then be held in this variable, but Vue will not know about it. Vue will not know, oh, this data changed, let me re-render myself. There's nothing here to tell it that. What we want to do is make sure that anytime this weather changes, that Vue knows about it so it can re-render the components. The way that happens is with ref. VS Code, please. Okay. We're going to make that a ref, and not only is it a ref, but is a ref of one weather. So this is a reference. This is a reference to a one weather object. That is the class that we created earlier. So by making this a ref, we're telling Vue, this is something special. This is something I want you to pay attention to, and anytime its data changes, I want you to re-render the component. So now, anytime that this weather data changes, Vue will re-render any component that uses it. So this is where part one of the Vue magic comes in that we get from the Composition API. We haven't even started building a Vue component yet, and yet we're using some of the Vue magic. And that's part of what makes the Composition API special, is that we can extract our data fetching out into a regular TypeScript file, and we can keep our data layer and data management separate from our Vue components, and then we can reuse this data management piece in multiple components. And Vue can just react to it thanks to ref. So we've typed our ref as a one weather, and then what we need to do when you create a ref, you can no longer assign this directly, but what you need to do is set weather.value. So all refs contain their data inside a value. It effectively turns even a base type like a Boolean or a string. It will turn it into an object so that it can track changes to it over time. And so you have to call .value. So that was our just part one of our Vue Composition API magic. Is we're using ref. You can see VS Code auto imported it from Vue. And so now we not only have this weather object, but we have a special weather object that Vue will pay attention to and re-render itself. That fixes all that. We can now fetch our weather, and we can now use it in other components. And it's in a reusable, regular, plain TypeScript file, which is really cool and powerful. So now let's create our first component, which is going to be current weather. Cool. So this is where my TypeScript snippets come in for templating. I'm going to type vbase. I'm using vbase 3 because we are using a Vue 3 template, and I'm also using -ts for the TypeScript version. So this will create a Vue 3 component using TypeScript. So that just templates out this code. You could, of course, type this out manually, but those templates just save time rewriting code that you would already use. So we have our component here, we have the setup function, and our return. So before we get too far into this, let's see, where should we start? I think first, why don't we just go ahead and get our weather object so that we can do something with it. So what I'm going to do here is, again, I'm going to use object destructuring to get out the pieces that we care about. So I'm going to say const weather, fetch weather. Those are the two things I want to get out of use weather. So now our use weather function is called in use weather service. It returns an object with weather and fetch weather in it. I'm just destructuring those into two individual variables that I can then use. Okay, let's go to the next step then, and we want to fetch the weather when this component is used. So for now, what I'm going to do is the next part of View Composition API, which is how do you run something when the component is mounted. The way that you do that is onMounted. Anything passed in here will be run when the component is mounted. That is what I would like to do. And what do I want to do when this component is mounted? I want to fetch the weather. So by doing that, that will then go trigger our API call down here, which will in turn update our weather object. View will notice that and then re-render the template. Cool. So now what we have here is a component that when it's mounted will go fetch the weather for us. That's great. But we also actually want to show the weather in our template. So in order to use anything in our template, it has to be returned out of the setup function. So anything that goes in here can in turn be used in our template above. So let's return weather out of there. And for now, I'm just going to put the whole thing in our template. Is this working? Oh, we've created our template, but we haven't put it anywhere. All right, that's a good point. We need to do that. Let's just create a temporary sort of demo page to kind of show this off. So I'm going to make another view app, weather demo dash view, vbase3ts, template that out. Okay. Then in here, if you're familiar with View 2, the components part is exactly the same. Any other components that you would like to use, you will list out here. And I want to use current weather, and I'm going to import all right. Great. Now I can come up here. And use that. And what I'm also going to do to keep with our folder by feature, again, to just kind of show this off, it's not going to be used in the final product necessarily, but I'm also going to put my routes in here. Again, folder by feature, I want to keep everything about this feature in here. I already have this pre-ready to go. This is a standard View router route. Boom. When I put this to weather demo, we're just going to name this weather. Cool. So I copied this from my example project I started off of, but this is a standard View router route. It has the path of /weather, has a name of weather, and then the component is lazily loaded. We don't really need to do that, but we're going to. This hooks us up our routes. So now our whole thing is all self-contained. We need to hook this route up though in our main router. We have router up here, here. We don't really care about this home anymore. And we are just going to say, let me make sure I named this correctly. weather routes. Great. Weather routes. So by doing that, we just hooked in that router. Kind of the beauty of the whole self-contained feature is that's all it takes. Now our routes are hooked up. And I'm just going to go ahead and redirect the base URL to weather. We don't need this home anymore. And I've missed something here, evidently. Let's go find that. Weather.routes. Well, it should work. It's not a module. I'm exporting it. Maybe I didn't save. Cool, I just hadn't saved the file. All right, so now you'll notice what happens here is my browser is popping up and asking me to know my location. That is because this service method is being called. You can see here on this very first line of fetch weather, it grabs our current position, and we need to give permission to allow that. And this fetch weather is happening because in current weather, onMounted, we're calling fetch weather. So onMounted, it fetches it, and we need to give it permission to give our location, which I'm going to allow. And here is all of our weather data. Remember that for now, I've just printed the whole thing out onto the screen. We're obviously not going to be using all of this, but this is the entire response back from the server, which is exactly what I did. I just put up here weather because I wanted to show that it worked, right? And it does. So now, before I move on to building the rest of the app, I want to just show off a couple other things about how the Vue Composition API works. So we've already seen that because we made our weather a ref, Vue knows about it and pays attention to it changing, and then we'll re-render the page, which is good, because if it didn't, then we wouldn't have gotten that display, because at the time of it showing up, there was no data there yet, because this fetch weather is asynchronous. But as soon as it finishes that call, weather is updated and it just appears. We can actually watch for changes on this as well. Because it's a ref, we can also use watch. So we can also say, watch weather. And I'm just going to log something out. I'm just doing this for demo purposes to show off watch as part of the Composition API. So now anytime weather changes, it's also going to log to the console. And there it is. I hit refresh. That fetched weather again, which then caused weather updated down here to be logged to the console. Okay, I want to show off one other thing, and that is using a click handler in our template. So again, anything that's returned out of setup can be used in our template. That doesn't just include variables, it also includes functions. If you're familiar with Vue 2, you remember that you'd keep your data and your methods separate. But here it's all, again, this goes back to grouping by feature instead of by type. So I don't have one folder with a bunch of views in it and then a store folder with a bunch of datas in it. Instead, I'm grouping by feature, and that's kind of the beauty of the Composition API as well. I can return everything, both methods and variables all together, and so I can keep my features together rather than my types. So both weather and fetch weather are related to each other. I'm going to return those right next to each other and deal with them in the same area in setup. So now that setup, now that fetch weather is being returned, I can also actually add a button in here. Click handler, I'm going to fetch weather. When it's clicked, I'm going to add that button. Save it. And I'm going to come back to my view. I don't think that out of template mode. There we go. Okay. I'm not using Ionic yet, so it wasn't scrolling properly. But nevertheless, I am here. I now have an update weather button. boom. Now, the weather hadn't changed, so it doesn't really look like there's anything different there. It's going to be a little subtle, but you can actually see down in my console that because the weather changed, when I hit update, I was watching that variable, and therefore I reacted to it by logging to the console. You can do that again. Again, I don't think anything changes. I don't know how often the weather updates on the API. So it's kind of hard to see here, but I just wanted to show off this is how you handle click handling as well as watching a variable using the Composition API. So with that shown off, I'm going to go ahead and remove this. This was just for describing how this should work. And I don't need to return fetch weather anymore. I'm not going to have a button on the screen that does that. And I also don't need to log this to the console when anything changes. Cool, so I'm good with just this for now. But what I need to do is turn, this simple code into this. So now we're going to get into Ionic and the Ionic components. So let's start building those pieces out. So for one, I need the Ion card. The Ion card is this whole square piece in the center. And in fact, our entire template for current weather is going to just be an Ionic card. This whole page as a whole will come separately. So we're just going to build out this card for the current weather. Okay. So let's start up here. We can get rid of everything in our template for now. Ion card, Ion card. Now, we don't want to really render this card until the weather has been fetched. Because remember, at startup, there will be no weather here yet. It'll only happen after our async call completes. So we're actually going to hide the card until it fetches. And we can show like a loading spinner in its place. So I'm going to make use of views vif and say weather.current. So this is going to check, and it's only going to render the card if the current weather exists, which will be a slight delay while we fetch it from the internet. Okay. And next, I need to make the header part. So the header includes this image. Well, maybe we should come back to the image. Let's do the header part down here, which is this description here, which says a few clouds. And this is now out. This is old now. I haven't refreshed this in a while, so it's probably not that anymore. But we'll fetch this part and this part, which is the description of the weather and the temperature. So let's do that next. That is Ion card header. And if you want to know where these are coming from, you can check the Ionic documentation, Ion card. Here's what a card looks like. You can see that looks very familiar. That's what we're using. Here's an example of it in view. Ion card header, subtitle, title. This is what we're going to be building out. We're just following the Ionic documentation. Okay, so much like we just saw, Ion card title, Ion card title. And I'm going to go ahead and make my Ion card subtitle. Actually, these need to be reversed. I will fix that. Subtitle actually comes above. If we look at our picture, subtitle is actually up here, and then regular titles down below. So let's reverse those. Cool. Okay. 1 second here. Need to like that. Cool. All right. So let's build out our subtitle. So if you're not familiar with Vue, this is how you access properties of your variable. It just has regular text inside your HTML. You do the double curly braces. So we're going to do weather.current.weather. I know that's a little bit weird, but that is how it's stored on the data. Remember, the weather is the one we mentioned was an array because it could be for a whole area instead of one specific location, and there could be multiple weather reports within that area. In our case, we're only concerned with the very first one. And our subtitle is going to be the description. Okay, and then we'll do our title. And our title is the current temp, weather.current.temp. Let's save that and let's see if that works. All right, cool. We do have clear skies, and then we have a temperature here. This is a good start. Although you notice down here in the corner, there's a number of warnings: failed to resolve component, ion card header, etc. That's because we have not yet told Vue about what components we're going to use. Remember that we need to tell Vue any components we use. And this is where our common Ionic component comes in really handy. We could individually import ion card header, and so on and so forth, but I've already done all that in one place. I'm just going to do this. And I believe ion card and everything is in here, but let's go check. Yep, all our warnings are gone. So if you didn't use the common Ionic components, you're going to need to declare each individual thing here and then import them up above. If you did, then you're still good to go. So, all right, cool. We're kind of on our way, right? Although I will say my browser is in dark mode, therefore Ionic automatically shows things in dark mode. If you would like to see what it looks like in light mode, if you use a dark mode browser, you can actually go down here to DevTools, click on this little More Tools icon here, and choose Rendering from the list. I already have it. It's right here. Scroll down to the bottom and then scroll up just a little bit to Prefers Color Scheme. And I'm going to say Emulate Light. So this is what it looked like in light mode. So you can use that to show off each one. I'm going to leave it at dark for now. We can come back and mess with that. Cool. The only thing is we can see how wide this card is being stretched out. We do want our card to be responsive, but we don't ever really want it to be this wide. So let's go ahead and down here, let's do ion card max width 350px. Now it'll just never grow to be that large. And we can see it stays down this. It'll still be responsive. If our screen shrinks a little bit, it can still respond to that. But it'll never grow larger than that, which is fine for the card that we're currently building. Cool. So we're doing fairly well here, but let's look at our temperature. Notice it includes the decimal point. There's no degree symbol, and there's no like Fahrenheit or C if you're doing Celsius. So we need to format that and show it appropriately in the way that we want. For one, I want to get that degree symbol. So what I'm going to do for that is just do at degree, save that. I've got the degree symbol, but I'm actually just going to copy and paste this out of here so I can build my own formatter separately. And I'm going to do that back inside my weather service. I'm just going to add a new method here. Function format temperature. It's going to take in a value, and then format will be either F or C. I'm going to return math.round because I just want to round to the nearest whole number for my temperature. I don't care about the decimal point. Okay, this is where my temperature symbol that I copied and pasted, or my degree symbol I should say, comes in handy. I'm just going to paste that right there rather than going and finding like the Unicode or whatever, figuring it out. Grab it that way, and then format goes here in my template string. And I want to be able to use this outside of this function, so it's going to get added to my return statement. Back in current weather, I'm going to add it to my destructuring object. And I need to use it in my template. So I'm going to put that there. I can get rid of this degree sign now because it's already going to come through. And I'm going to call format temperature. Save that. Let's take a look. So something's wrong here. We did not pass it in the F or the C, which we needed to do. So let's do that. Great. Cool. So we're kind of on our way, right? We have the subtitle and the title working. The next thing that we're going to tackle is the image. You'll notice in our app, there's a big image here with like a blue background and the logo. These logos actually also come from OpenWeather API. They have a URL that we can grab the icon and use that on. So we're going to build that part out next. So first, we actually need to write the code to go get the image. And again, we're going to come back to our weather service. And we're going to do function get weather image URL. It takes in an icon name. That's the icon name comes back from the API. And we can give it a size. It can either be 2x or 4x. This is just, again, this is going off the Open Weather API documentation. This is just how it's formatted. So we're going to return out of this a string. I'm just going to copy and paste this to make sure that I am grabbing the correct URL. Okay, that's the URL, and then you pass it the icon name. And then there is an @ symbol. And then you pass it either the 2x or the 4x, whichever one is being used. So we're going to say size. That gets sent in there, and it's a PNG. Cool. So that should let us grab the actual image from their website. And once again, we need to use this in our template. Because we need to use it in our template, we need to return it out of our useWeather function. Come back to current weather. Let's destructure it out of here. And we need to return it so that it's available up here on the template. Okay, now that that's available to us, we're going to put our image up here. Now the thing about these images though is they have a transparent background, which is fine. It lets you, it makes them more flexible. I actually like that, but I want to put a blue background behind it. So what I'm actually going to do is create just a div to hold my image, and I'm going to give it the class weather background. And then I'm going to put my image inside of here. We need to bind to the source of the image with code. And the way you do that in Vue is by putting a colon first. By putting the colon in front of source, I can then actually put code in here. So I'm going to say get weather image URL. And I'm going to pass it weather.current.weather0.icon. That is in the data where the icon name is stored. And then we need to pass it a size. We want to use the larger size here because it's a larger picture. We're going to pass it 4x. And then down here at the bottom, I'm going to add my weather background class. Background color, sky blue. All right. So that's a start, but we have one issue, which is that our image is not centered in the middle. So let's go fix that. Ion card image. We're gonna just cheat and do this the simple way. We could use the Ionic grid and things to use display flex and center it, but in our case, it's kind of simple. So let's just display block. You know, we could use Flexbox for that, but just such a simple little thing. Boom, centered. All right, so we are making pretty good progress here. Really, the only thing left to do is add some of these additional data points down here at the bottom. Feels like wind speed, sunrise, and sunset. So let's code those out. We have our card. I'm gonna just split these up a little bit with some white space here. We have our card header, and then we have our Ion card content. We're going to use the Ionic responsive grid for this, because this is complex enough that I think it's a good use for it. And then we're going to say, on the first row, let's do feels like. Now again, we want to format our temperature for this. This is a temperature again, so let's do format temperature. And then feels like is weather.current.feels like. Okay. In our next column, we're going to say wind speed. This is obviously not a temperature, it's a speed. But I still don't really care about the decimal point here, so I'm going to do I'm just going to round it. Okay. Check in on our code here. Okay, we have something wrong here. It looks like our wind speed is coming through, but we're also getting an undefined. It's part of our fields like. So what have I gotten wrong here? I know what it is. I again forgot to pass in that I'm using Fahrenheit. I could avoid that by just making it always Fahrenheit, but I wanted to make it flexible to use both. And then this is in miles per hour, so I'm going to put that in here as well. Cool. There we go. That looks better. All right, great. Let's add our next column, and we'll be on our way. Actually, our next row, I should say. Sorry, that's it for that one. Second row. This is our sunrise and sunset times. Sunrise. So we have to do a little bit of magic here because this is a Unix timestamp. So we're going to say new date weather.current.sunrise. And for Unix timestamps, you have to multiply by 1,000. Okay. Then we need to call to locale time string to turn this into a readable time. And I think we can just pass it nothing and time style. This time style is kind of new. Let's see if that worked for us. Sunrise, 7:02 a.m. It did. If you're using an older browser, you may not be able to get away with this simpler formatting. You can always use a library like Moment.js to make sure it always works. But I wanted to keep things just as simple as possible and not involve any other third-party libraries. So I haven't done that. I'm just kind of doing it this way. It's just using kind of a newer feature of dates. Sunset, same exact thing, except for sunset instead. To locale time string. Great. All right. That looks the same. Great. So there's that. Again, we can go in here, see what it looks like in a light color scheme. There it is. So that's our first feature done. Okay, let's jump over and let's start working on forecast. So again, everything, this is under the weather feature still. Oh, this is not a TypeScript file. This is a Vue file. Cool. Again, I'm going to use my snippets to just build my template for me. And let's start on the forecast. So again, we're going to need a lot of our same pieces that we had before. We need the weather. We need fetch weather, get weather image URL, and format temperature. Great, that gives us all those things, and we're going to be using weather. We don't need fetch weather on the template, but we do need get weather image URL, and we also need format temperature. Okay. Now again, we always want to grab the weather when it's mounted, and then we can go fetch the weather every time. However, this is a time for a possible refactor. You see, each of these are going to end up fetching our weather, and that might be okay. But in our case, all we're really doing right now is weather, and we always want it to be there. So this might be a good time to refactor our weather service to make it fetch the weather for us and then just refetch it every so often, like maybe every 2 minutes. We'll just keep it updated. So why don't we just go ahead and do that? And I'm just going to say that weather.value equals fetch weather. Oh, sorry, I don't need to assign it because I assign it inside of my function itself. And then what I'm also going to do is set interval. I want to fetch weather every, let's say, 2 minutes. So that would be what, 120? Is that right? I think so. 1,000 milliseconds is 1 second. So times 60 is 60,000 times 2, so that should be every 2 minutes. So what this is going to do is just like as soon as the weather service, as soon as this is included in a file, boom, this will get populated, and then it'll refetch itself every 2 minutes, and then we can just remove our mounted. That way the weather service kind of handles itself and handles it updating. This is going to be obviously something you want to figure out how you want your data to work. But for our purposes, we always want it to be there. And we want it to update every so often because the weather does change over time, of course. So this will let us update that every so often. Okay. And let's make sure that it hasn't broken. So it works. It's good. Cool. So with that little refactor out of the way, we don't really need to let our components worry about fetching the weather. Instead, the weather service takes care of itself, and we can just use weather, which means we can also get rid of this from our destructuring here. In fact, we don't really even want it to be accessible outside of here because weather service is now going to handle itself. So let's not return it. That way no one else uses it when they shouldn't be. Or effectively just turn this into a private function that only lives inside this module. Okay. That out of the way, let us build our forecast. So we already have our things here. For this, we're going to use ion list. And not every page that you build is going to have a list in it. So I actually don't have that included in common Ionic components. So we are going to manually include each of these components. Okay, and then we need to import those manually. You could include these in Ionic common components if you're using a list on every page of your app, or more than a couple. But in my case, I just haven't included them there, so I'm importing them manually. And now I can build out my list. So my root of my template is going to be ion list. Ion list header is going to be forecast. Then we have a list of ion items in our list. We're going to use v4, views looping, to say for daily weather in weather daily. And in fact, why don't we go ahead and, much like our current weather, let's put a vif up here and let's only render this out if weather.daily exists. Then we don't actually need to worry about optional chaining anywhere else. Anytime you do a loop in Vue, you have to give it a key so that it can track things being unique. So we're going to say daily.date, which is another Unix timestamp for the date of this item. So that will always be unique in this array. Okay. Next, Ion Avatar. This again, I'm just following Ionic's documentation. Ionic Avatar is what is going to give us this image over here. Okay, and in here again, I'm going to create a wrapping div for the blue background. Then once again, okay, now we're going to use 2x. We're not going to use 4x for this one because it's a smaller image. Boom, boom, boom. Great. All right, let's pause there and let's go actually add this over to our weatherdemo.view. Ion item and ion label. Oh yeah, we haven't used those yet because I haven't finished the code. I imported too much too soon and now it's mad at me. I wonder if I can get away with just doing this quickly and show this off. Yeah. Cool. So there's our forecast. All we have is the logos yet, but then we have all of our logos for each day in our list. Great, let's uncomment those because we're about to use them. Okay, there's our avatar. Let's add our label. Okay, pause there again and check our progress. onMounted is defined, component was registered. Ion item, oh, that's why I have a typo there. Let's fix that. Great, okay, cool. Starting to look good, right? This is very close to our final thing. We just need one other thing, which is to put the date so you know which day goes to which item here. So let's do that. I wish that VS Code would do closing tags automatically in view components, but for some reason I have not gotten that to work, so I have to create them manually. Same thing to format our date here, but we're doing a to-locale date string. These are our date format options. That's just built into JavaScript date formatting. Great, so now we have our icon, we have our temperature, we have our description, we have our date. Okay. However, we don't get our blue background on these, like up here, and I want us to have that. So let's finish that up. Background color is sky blue. Border radius is 100% to make it a circle. Border 2px solid white. We're going to give it a border. Now we've got that. Am I missing something here? Because these look too close together, right? There's no padding there. Something is a little bit off, it looks like. Let me just check my code here. Ion avatar, weather background. Well, I'm not sure what is causing that issue, I have to say. Because there should be some padding in here, you know? Ion avatar should be applying a right margin, and it's not. And I'm not sure why. Guess we can simply go in here, see if we can do this. All right, I'm happy with that. I'm not sure why that was there and the other one and not here, but now we got that spaced out. And you know, this looks pretty good to me. So this is sort of our sample page, and our components and our work is done. So now I kind of want to show off to you how easy by using this folder by feature method, and also by using the Composition API. Let's look at how easily we can reuse this code. I'm going to just copy this folder, and I've already created a weather tabs demo here, and I'm just going to paste it in here, and I'm going to go ahead and open terminal and start it up. So this is a whole new project. I just created this ahead of time so you wouldn't have to sit here and watch me recreate an Ionic component or project, I should say. But all you do is do Ionic start tabs, and now you can see I have a tabs layout with my 3 tabs. And this is where we're going to build out the last piece of our demo application, which is to make our components in here. But because we kept our feature totally self-contained, all we had to do was copy and paste this weather piece over, and we can actually look at our test page right away by going here and doing weather routes, add a comma, save that, okay? This is our new project, and instead of tabs, tab 3, let's go to /weather. And look, it's asking for my location again. Boom, here it is. So I just reused all that code we just wrote. That's as easy as it is to reuse, including individual pages, our components, our routes are all there. So by using folder by feature, it's so easy to reuse your code. You copy all I had to do was copy a folder over and type one line of code, ... weather routes, and instantly I can reuse all my code. We're not actually going to use that test page. It was really just there for test purposes, but I wanted to show off why we kept the routes in the folder as well, and it's for very fast and easy reusability across multiple projects. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of this because we don't really care about that. And we only have 2 tabs in our project, so let's just go ahead and clean up a little bit of that by getting rid of this, going into views, deleting tab 3, going into tabs, and we need to get rid of this. Cool. I'm just going to kind of space this out. We got rid of that route. Let's just go back to home. Cool. Now we only have 2 tabs. And let's start by renaming them in their own headers. Tab 1 is current weather. Tab 2, forecast. And this explore container is a component that they put in here that just kind of shows you the little thing on the page. We don't need to do that. Explore containers, register but never used. Yes, let me go clear that up. We do not need this. Again, they have this components folder. Again, we're not going to do that because we use folder by feature, not by type. We're going to get rid of all that. That cleans that up. Get rid of this. Get rid of this. Cool. Current weather, forecast. So far so good, right? Let's just add our UI layout and we're gonna finish this up. Okay, so we got all this stuff taken care of up here. Got our header, toolbar. Oh, I need to fix. Really sure why this is here twice. I think that's something to do with tabs. All right. Now what's going on here? We're going to use Ion Grid. We want to center things in this grid. I'm going to create a class to basically give this a minimum width so it doesn't shrink down smaller than it'll fit. So I've created this min width class here. We'll come back to that in a moment, but I want to use current weather here. Okay. And then I need to, why Ionic doesn't have style in here, I don't know. This will just stop our card from shrinking too small. Okay. I think that VS Code just didn't insert this correctly, it would appear to me, which is odd. Okay. And instead of doing all this, do current weather, common Ionic components. Okay. Boom. Okay, and we can see what this looks like on mobile. And if you want to see what it looks like in light mode. Cool. All right, let's do our second tab. Forecast. And this, we don't really need a grid. It's okay for this to take up the entire width of the screen. It doesn't like look bad, unlike the card, which wouldn't be, you know. Why VS Code can't handle this? I think it's because it's all in one line. I'm not really sure why it's not inserting that correctly for me. Cool, and there's our forecast. Boom, 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 boom. All right, we're almost done. We need to clean up these bottom tabs here, so it doesn't say tab 1 and 2 with a triangle and a circle. And we're finished. Go over here to tabs. And let's see here. We need to get, first of all, not any of these. We do not need these shapes, but we are going to use Ionic's built-in calendar outline icon. Okay. And what we're going to use that for is this. And we're going to name it forecast. Great, so there's our second one handled, right? Forecast with a calendar is what we wanted to see. Tab 1 is a little more complicated because what I've actually done is put the icon of the current weather as well as the degrees there. So even while you're on the forecast tab, you know what's going on in the weather, at least from an icon and a temperature. So we need to wrap that up and then we're done. So over here, we're going to, instead of an ion icon, we're going to say image source equals get weather image URL. And I haven't imported these yet, so we need to do that. Weather, format, temperature, and get weather image URL. Great, now those are all available to us, and let's, we're really doing the same thing here that we did before. We're going to say and label current. Great. Now this is going to put the icon there, but you notice that it's a bit too big. Even though we use the smaller size, it's obviously too large for this. So we just need to write a little CSS to make that fit. And I'd already messed around with these sizes before, so I'm just going to copy them from what I did before. Cool. And there we go. Current image, forecast. Cool. So that's it. I mean, this whole video looks like I'm sitting at about 1 hour and 15 minutes. And considering we went into some descriptions and things, I mean, really, we could build this whole app in less than an hour. The things that I just wanted to highlight, we talked about a little bit, but by using the folder by feature approach, it was very easy for us to take a feature we already wrote and port it over to a different Vue project. The other important thing to think about is using the Composition API to extract out shared logic. We did that here with weather service. This is logic shared across 3 components now, and it's fully reusable by as many components as we want. We had it being used in 2 components, our current weather.view and our forecast.view. They were able to share this functionality, including this weather object, which let it just sort of magically update itself anytime it changed. So we were able to share that data across our 2 components initially. But then when we ported our code over, you know, this shared weather service is still usable by other things. So then we used it over here in our tabs to go grab the temperature to put it in our tab. So by keeping that shared functionality separate, it's really easy to reuse. And by using folder by feature and keeping all of our code together, it's also very easy to reuse. So if you follow this sort of pattern, theoretically your code becomes much more organized and reusable. And really, while you're working, easier to find. You know, if you have to fix a bug, you have a much larger project, it's like, oh, there's something wrong with the weather. Where would that code live? Well, all of it lives in one folder. This could have subfolders under it as it starts to grow, right? If you had many more pages and you started writing unit tests, which would also live under here, you know, you might have subfolders in here, but you always know that all of the things related to this feature are in one folder. So easy to find your code, easy to reuse it, and easy to share that logic across multiple things. So hopefully that gave you a good idea of how the Vue Composition API works in Vue 3, and also a little look at Ionic. So thanks for watching. If you have any feedback, if there's something here that, you know, maybe should be changed or improved, please let me know. You know, Vue 3 is still really new. So I'm sure that as time goes on, we'll come up with different patterns. But this is what I've come up with so far. So please leave feedback in the comments. Thanks.